Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of the Segal C podcast. I'm research analyst Trisha Mohite, and I'll be your host for this episode. Today, we are going to touch upon really interesting topics, for which joining us we have Mr. Sandesh Ghandat. He is an expert in shipping and commodity markets. So it's great to have you here, Sandesh.
Well, thank you, Trisha, for inviting me once again, and it will be my pleasure to be here with you and to talk about something very significant analysis.
Now, well, moving ahead, we have witnessed a complex interplay between OPEC Plus production strategies, US policy under a Trump administration, and even various geopolitical tensions that are disrupting the supply chain. Now, given the potential for OPEC Plus, to reintroduce the 2.2 million barrels per day of supply starting in April 2025, coupled with Trump's history of pressurizing OPEC, pretty sure we know about that by now, to curb the prices and his very famous drill baby drill approach. So, how do you see or how do you foresee this affecting the global oil prices and subsequently, or let me say mainly, our tanker market? Can the tanker owners expect a period of sustained stability, or are we looking at continued volatility driven by these competing forces?
Well, Trisha, thanks for that question. And you know what? Right now, the stage is set for the fascinating yet potentially chaotic period in the oil and tanker markets because you know what the dynamic you described about OPEC Plus and its easing cuts while facing pressure from US administration pushing for increased domestic production. It creates a kind of a real tug of war, and this tug of war that will heavily influence oil prices and then consequently tanker demand. OPEC plus 2.2 million barrel per day reintroduction is kind of a significant volume that in isolation should put downward pressure on prices. And prices, I mean to say oil prices, specifically if demand remains sluggish. The move that also highlights that internal issues in OPEC Plus are also in a play. So this will also lead to a drop in freight rates due to increase in supply and more tankers are needed to support this movement. So this also highlights the importance of monitoring how quickly and smoothly this supply comes back online and whether individual members adhere to their quotas. This is where Kazakhstan and Nigeria were exceeding. Now, when we say Trump's influence and Trump's reintroduction or Trump's renewed kind of a US administration, so this is a kind of a wild card for us. So his track record, he shows he is not afraid to use political pressure and unconventional tactics to drive down prices as per history during his last term. And even today we also seeing the same thing where he used the tariff and its favorite word of tariff he used consequently to his neighbors with the Canada and Mexico that we have seen the significant influence and then the reciprocal tariffs that is coming from those particular nations. And then again the flashback, we have to see how this monumental effect going to be there on the oil prices. So this is all very fascinating for us. But at the same time, with the increasing domestic production, specifically from shale, US adds further downside risk to oil prices because his term drill baby drill approach, most of analysts think that even we at our end, we have done analysis and it suggests that there will not be that much growth. But yes, there will be a definite growth, but that growth will be started declining. So what that suggests, there will be increased oil production, but not at which we have seen in the past. In the past, we have seen oil production exceeded 13 million barrels per day. And on the similar context, we may see another 14 or 14.5 million barrels per day production by next 2 or 3 years. But what we can expect from all this? Personally, I expect an all-time high in supply of, crude oil. And since crude oil, it is production from shale, we have associated shale gas, and thereby we have a natural gas also high in supply due to this particular shale boom. Talking about geopolitical risk, we have to say never forget the geopolitical element because from the Middle East to Ukraine to potential trade wars, unforeseen events, they can disrupt supply and send prices soaring because the drone strike on Kazakhstan CPC pipeline is a stark reminder of this vulnerability. And we have kind of discussed this and discussed this potential impact in our earlier podcast. So we have certain scenarios where we say might small disruption in the oil supply, but at the same time we also have to be very crucial how this increased oil supply and then the sluggish demand specifically coming from China, how will impact to the global oil scenario. Now you have asked about the tankers. So let's assume that what it will be do, what this situation, what will be, mean for the tankers, because I would say sustained volatility is the most likely outcome, because for the following reasons: low oil prices, they kind of are driven by increased supply and it could stimulate demand, but leading to the higher tanker demand. Now think from the other perspective, the political tensions and natural disasters, the opposite could also happen. So the tanker market is never at ease for tanker owners. Also, the number of vessels they are sailing from one part to another affects prices too. And you also must note that supply is kind of a declining. Then the OPEC Plus can use their surplus tool to bring additional supply into the market, and if that has significant impact towards the tankers, because if there will be an incremental demand in the future, that means I'm talking about 2026 and onwards. So if that demand is there, then there will be a sufficient supply to be present in the market, because the prices, they could be remain in the region where consumers and both producers kind of feel happy towards the trade, because from my perspective, 75 to $85 price is kind of a benchmark price for both producers and suppliers, where they can easily trade will be concluded, because if the price is high substantially, then it will lead to demand destructions, and at the same time if it is decline, then it's a vice versa effect. OPEC plus always play a key role in the maintaining supply balance, as well as to control the prices. Not control, but they have for strategies in place where they implement those strategies where the prices will not increase substantially and will remain the momentum at which they are continues to hovering, or from the price brackets which I have just mentioned. So this is kind of a phenomenon, or this is kind of a structure that present in the market, where supply can boost very easily from the OPEC plus nations, specifically from the OPEC, because they have a surplus capacity. And the effect, or the underlying effect on the tanker demand, is it's all depend on the crude oil demand from the markets, specifically from China and India. India, definitely there will be incremental demand, but Chinese demand is kind of a skeptical right now, but we believe that it will rebound by 2026, and then there will be a significant impact on the tanker demand as well, specifically on the crude oil tankers, because a lot of cargoes will be available in the open market and the tanker owners will compete for those particular cargoes, and the sentiments kind of look positive and sentiments kind of look firmer for 2026 and onwards.
Well, thanks, Sandesh, for explaining that complex interplay and sharing your thoughts on the tanker market. Now, let's move ahead and talk about the ceasefire that's happening in Ukraine. Now, there obviously has been increasing talks that we've been hearing about a potential ceasefire in Ukraine and the likelihood of sanctions relief. Could we see a return to pre-war trade patterns, or will the landscape remain fundamentally altered?
Well, again, Trisha, that's a great question. And there is a lot to unpack here. You know what? The potential for ceasefire and the resulting sanctions relief, because the ceasefire and sanctions relief, they go in hand. So it is indeed a major shift that could, significantly reshape energy markets. If Washington pursues the negotiated peace, Mr. Trump, and which is now seems increasingly likely with the reported 70% probability of ceasefire by 2025, so we can expect to see some notable changes in the energy trade patterns. Now let's start with the sanctions easing. So we have a sanctions, we means the coalition between the western markets, they had a sanctions on Russia, and the United States is likely to take initial steps such as reducing enforcement on tanker sanctions. So now the sanctions are on the two different principles. One is commodity sanctions, where they have to, Europe have to take, or for the matter of fact, any other people in the world, they have to take Russian oil. They have to take that Russian oil under the price cap. With this, we think that this will probably come in the stages. The sanctions release or sanction easing will come in the stages, and with the US first relaxing restrictions on oil and gas flows before addressing the broader financial sanctions landscape. So while a partial rollback of sanction, it could coincide with the ceasefire. Broader EU sanctions relief would likely require a more sustained peace, because we don't know, because it happened in the past, and even the Zelensky has mentioned it, that despite ceasefire agreement, Russia keeps kind of getting back on the war front. This has to be addressed, and the potential hurdles in the Europe, these are kind of a steeper, as the member states like Poland and Baltic countries will resist the restoring ties with the Russian energy suppliers. So this is the overall landscape. But talking specifically with the gas sector, Russian pipeline export to Europe, which kind of a plunge just 19 BCM per year after the invasion, could rebound to around 50 BCM. So that is around twofold growth, or maybe threefold growth. But however, this is still far BCM, and notably, this recovery would likely rely on spot sales rather than the long-term contracts, with the countries like Hungary, Greece, Austria, Slovakia being a primary buyers. So potential engagement from the Czech Republic, Italy and Germany, it could also emerge, but albeit cautiously, because however significant risks persist with respect to Russia, because there is an arbitration dispute with Gazprom, and then the concerns about supply reliability, and the question was ceasefire's durability and could limit this growth. So ultimately, if we conclude that by what time there will be a complete restrictions or complete easement of sanctions is still be under question, but at the same time, our optimism says that it could be possible to achieve by the end of 2025. Now that is about the gas pipeline export. Now on the LNG side, Russia's export to Europe, which hit 24 BCM in 2024, may expand further, because however any growth here will face stiff competition from the new global LNG supplies, specifically from the US, because US will play a very key role in the LNG supplies, because during the war, when the entire Europe did not take any pipeline supply of gas, they have shifted their own reliance from Russian pipe gas to US LNG. So Europe's energy diversification efforts means what? Means Russian LNG won't simply regain lost dominance, and they have now lost the complete market share. Not completely, but a significant market share went to US LNG. Now that's about the LNG side. Now turning to the oil market, we may see some limited recovery in the Russian crude trade. But again, a full return to pre-war patterns is kind of a shaky and kind of unlikely right now. But then we have a Western traders like Gunvor, Mercuria, Vitol, Trafigura. They may cautiously resume trade with Russia, because pre-war they have kind of a lifting larger volumes, but after war they have reduced those particular volumes, and we expect that these volumes could be rebound when there is a kind of a full easement on sanctions. So we expect that there will be a rebound, but then the volumes could be reduced. Having said that, we have a Central and Eastern European countries along with Italy. It might be willing to accept discounted Russian crude for some short time, while Poland and Baltics, they are expected to remain staunchly opposed. Interestingly, US refiners may take advantage of relaxed enforcement to access Russian fuel oil for bending, kind of a cost-effective strategy that may supply constraint, because you have to understand that there is sanction on getting Russian fuel oil into the US market. At the same time, when the sanction will ease, some of the US players or some of the US refiners for whom Russian fuel oil is favorable, because it's a cost effective, and the technicality is already present inside the US refineries. So for them it's a favorable scenario, and they will likely pursue that opportunity. But however, this won't be necessarily translate into Russia regaining a dominant position, because as Europe's diversified sourcing strategy, it will keep Moscow's market share very, very constrained. And that will be the key for the Russia, where they will want to go to the market and kind of access the new market strategies. Now, another key shift may involve with the India because currently one of the Russia's biggest buyers of discounted crude is India. And it could see reduced volumes if Europeans buyers outbid them. The discounts that will available for India earlier will not be available for them now. And sourcing the Russian crude prior to pre-war is kind of difficult because the freight cost and the actual cost of Russian Urals were very high, and it is non-competent with the traditional sellers like crude oil from the Middle East. So, since India is a country which kind of a very sensitive to the prices of crude oil, it will be able to shift their dominance from Russian crude to Middle Eastern crude. And we have seen such kind of a scenario when there is a harsh sanctions on Russia and Russian oil and eventually Russian oil tankers that India has started reducing crude oil from the Russia. Now, having said that, meanwhile, talking about Japan and South Korea, they may re-enter in the Russian energy market as competition for discounted barrels. They might heat up. So, for India, there will be a competition from both the markets. Competition from Far Eastern markets like not China but Japan and South Korea. But at the same time, the Europeans also could outbid them. So for them, it will be kind of a tricky situation for them because they have to adjust their resources, crude oil resources, or they kind of find a new alternative resources for crude oil by going into the deep market in the Latin America as well as in the West Africa.
Well, Sandesh, I have to say it has been truly incredible and insightful discussion that we had today. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise, and it was great to have you here.
Well, thanks Trisha, and thanks to audience for supporting us over the time. It was a pleasure for me to be here and share my knowledge with you and our audience. Thank you, Trisha.
Thank you so much, Sandesh. And to all our listeners, thank you so much for tuning in. Do not forget to share and follow us. Until next time, navigate safely and stay informed.